60 Minutes Rewind.
We spent last Monday in Plains, Georgia with Jimmy Carter, the 39th President of the United States, and he was surprisingly candid on the subject of Ronald Reagan. He devotes his days now to writing, fishing, farming, and teaching, and says that he's happy doing it, that he doesn't look wistfully at Washington and the power that resides there. His Democratic Party has turned its back on him, and he acknowledges that the American people would just as soon forget the Carter years. These aren't easy questions to ask, sitting in a man's living room, but the Carter image, the political image, is that of a loser. Why?
Well, it may be easier to ask a question than it is to answer it, but I'll be glad to answer it. Well, my last political encounter was with Reagan in November of 1980, and I lost. And I think that's the image that still remains in people's minds, that I was not reelected.
You must be very jealous, in a sense, of Ronald Reagan.
Not really.
I'm jealous of the fact that he is, I mean, if his is the Teflon presidency,
yes,
nothing sticks.
Mine was the opposite.
Yours was the flypaper presidency.
I think that's true. When I was there was no doubt who was responsible.
Buck stops here.
I was responsible. Now there is a great doubt about who's responsible, and Reagan has been extremely successful, more than any of his 39 predecessors, in not being responsible for anything that's unpleasant or not completely successful.
Well, how does he manage that, Mr. President?
Well, he's blamed me for his $200 billion deficits. He's blamed me and Ford and Nixon for his lack of understanding of the Lebanon crisis, saying that this intelligence network was not adequate for him. He's blamed the Congress for his withdrawal of the Marines from Lebanon under, very damaging circumstances. And he has never accepted responsibility for lack of progress in Middle East peace or a lack of progress on alleviating the problems of the poor and so forth. And he's been remarkably successful in telling people, everything's okay. At least as far as I'm concerned, everything's okay. It's okay for the Marines to be embarrassed and damaged in Lebanon. It's okay to have $200 billion deficits. It's okay to have $120 billion trade imbalances and so forth.
He doesn't say it's okay, Mr. President. I mean,
he said it's okay with him, and he's not responsible. Don't associate him as president with any of these problems. We have now almost doubled our nation's debt since Reagan has been in office. When I left the White House, the United States of America was the greatest creditor nation on earth. By the end of this year, we'll be the greatest debtor nation on earth. And we're now seeing a wave of economic suffering in the agricultural community of our country, which is the most evident first indication of Reagan's policies. I think the second indication will be a continued deterioration in the banking and financial institutions of our country. So, what will be the Reagan heritage is too early to say. I cannot think of a single international or diplomatic achievement that's been realized by Ronald Reagan.
President Carter has written a new book on the Middle East called Blood of Abraham. We asked him what bold new moves he might undertake there now if he were president.
There is no reason why George Shultz can't sit down with Yasser Arafat if they want to make a bold new stroke.
If who wants to make a bold new stroke?
If the United States wants to make a bold new stroke, and the people in the Middle East.
Would you recommend that now?
Yes, I think that would be a good move, yes.
What's going to be the outcry in Israel if such a meeting were to take place?
We could make, well, there has to be a willingness to face outcries. And I don't see any way for any substantive progress to be made in the Middle East peace process without the Palestinians being intimately involved in the process.
But it's not just the Middle East that worries him, it's war and peace. You think we're closer to war today than we should be?
I think we have let the world know that our country is no longer the foremost proponent or user of negotiations and diplomacy, and that our country's first reaction to a troubled area on earth is to try to inject American military forces or threats as our nation's policy.
Human rights under Ronald Reagan.
Well, Reagan has basically abandoned our nation's commitment to the human rights policy that we espoused.
Why? Because he's a callous man?
I think part of it was a natural adverse reaction to my administration's policies. One of his first moves, for instance, was to send Mrs. Kirkpatrick to snuggle up to Pinochet in Chile and to the military junta in Argentina, who had been responsible for more than 10,000 deaths through those who disappeared in the middle of the night. And this was a clear signal that went all over the world that the previous human rights policy under my administration was being changed. I don't know what his motivations are, but the result has been that the world now sees our country as not being a champion of human rights, but as being dormant at best in the face of persecution.
I think this president makes us comfortable with our prejudices.
That's not very nice. What you're saying.
But it's the way I feel, and I think it's true.
Despite rumors that she might run for governor of Georgia, Rosalind Carter says she has no political ambition. But she is no less candid about President Reagan than is her husband.
I think he's been devastating to the country. And
How? How has he devastated the country?
well, I wouldn't trade places with him in history, with Jimmy and Ronald Reagan, for anything in the world, unless I'll qualify that because he could correct some of those things in this thing. But the big budget deficit that I think is going to, that my grandchildren will have to pay for, that's going to hurt us forever. He did not even have a single gesture of goodwill toward the Soviet Union the whole first 4 years.
The story will continue after this.
Since they left Washington, the Carters have returned to a simpler life in Plains. On Sundays, they and their daughter Amy, now near college age, worship at Baptist services. The president teaches Sunday school here, frequently attended by large groups of visitors, tourists.
Have my joy fulfilled in themselves. How much joy were the disciples going to have? Not much.
Okay, you want us in there now, too?
And after church, the president patiently poses for pictures and signs autographs for folks who have stopped by to meet Plains' sole tourist attraction. Twice a week, he travels to Atlanta, where he teaches liberal arts courses as a distinguished professor at Emory University. But his roots and his heart, he says, are in Plains. Still, though, he will talk politics when prodded.
Good to see you. Just fine.
Is hands-on political experience a must for a president? Could a Lee Iacocca conceivably be as good a president as a Jimmy Carter or a Ronald Reagan?
Well, I know he could be as good as one of us. Whether he could be as good as both of us, I really don't know. But I think that sort of approach to American life that Lee Iacocca has exemplified would be very beneficial in the White House.
But he's never been elected to office. Does that necessarily put him beyond the pale for the presidency?
No, because he would have to go through a very torturous and difficult political campaign to get there. And so that his absence of experience in the political field would obviously be filled while he was running for president.
Sounds like Jimmy Carter's going to run an Iacocca for president campaign.
I have an admiration for him.
You do?
Sure.
One of the personal low points of his presidential years, he acknowledges, was his collapse while jogging in a mountain marathon. You remember this, Mr. President?
Sure.
Do you think that in the final analysis, that episode did you any harm politically?
It probably did. I think that showed that I had tried something that I couldn't finish, and that I had attempted something where I didn't succeed.
And it had nothing whatsoever to do with politics or governmental affairs or...
Well, you know, politics is a matter of image, and the image that I had attempted something that I didn't accomplish, I think did have political connotations. But around in the cemetery...
His mother, Miss Lillian, died 2 years ago. He took us to the Carter burial plot in Plains. You were very, very close to your mother.
Yes, I was. Mama helped shape my life. Mother, even in the difficult years of racial segregation down here, Mother was the I guess, was a token liberal, the token integrationist around Plains. And she's always the champion of the underdog, and at that time, of course, the blacks were the underdogs. So Mama was, well, she was really inspirational. After my father died, Mother kind of blossomed forth.
Miss her?
Yes, very much so. Particularly when early in the mornings, I used to go out before daybreak, and Mom and I would just talk about politics or sports or family affairs, and kind of watch the sun come up together in the morning. Even when she was in her last month, she knew she had cancer, and she knew that she wouldn't live very long, but she was always an exciting companion.
You know, I have one memory on television of watching you and Ted Kennedy on the platform back in 1980. Was that a bitter time for you? And does any of that bitterness remain toward Ted Kennedy?
Well, I don't think, maybe bitter is the right word. We didn't feel, and I still don't feel, that Kennedy had any reason to challenge me as an incumbent Democratic president and therefore destroy the unity of a party which is so crucial. And about the only time the Democratic Party has a chance to be unified is when there's an incumbent Democratic president. Mm-hmm. And I think that the primary season with Kennedy never giving up even until the convention assembled gave us a tremendous obstacle to overcome in the fall election. But I think that it would be highly unlikely that Ted Kennedy would ever be approved as a potential president by the American people. He's always done best when he didn't have a chance to win.
So you think that next time around, whatever is the image of Ted Kennedy in the mind of the American people, it will not have changed sufficiently for them, for the Democratic Party, to give him the nomination?
That's right. That's my expectation and also my hope.